for application of humanitarian law of funding. And indeed, next door here, the UNICEF European Office has a very good French young lady, Sandrine Flavier. And she is excellent. Sandrine Flavier actually developed for UNICEF a strategy to use Twitter and other social networks, not only to raise funds, but also to raise awareness about issues. And then she was telling me, oh, you know Selena Gomez? Who knows Selena Gomez? Huh? You know her?
An actress, singer.
Yeah,
not in person.
Disney star.
Okay. I did not know her before she mentioned her name, but I see that as you are young, you know her. And she told me...
I'm 13,
But to say, yes, we need also to have relays. We need also to have people like this. And actually, to say, you know, Selena Gomez has 50 million followers or whatever. And if we ask her to tweet something about UNICEF, it will be reaching a lot of people. Then, last thing on the alert and accountability, I would like here to pay homage to a friend from Italy, Francesco Pisano. Francesco Pisano used to be with the Italian Armed Forces and is now with UNITA. And he established UNOSAT. UNOSAT is using commercial satellite pictures to evidence violations of humanity. And I will just give briefly two examples, Sri Lanka and Gaza. But 1 month ago, he published very damning pictures from the destruction in Gaza. And I can tell you, yes, it will be useful for the reconstruction of Gaza, but possibly one day it will be useful for the condemnation of the criminals who did inflict such destruction to this city. Okay, my conclusion now is to say, yes, definitely, the Internet contributes to humanitarian action law. It certainly could be used more efficiently for the benefit of all, and for this, we definitely need to combine the 3 layers. The local, and now cell phones or mobile phones are really key, the regional and the universal. But again, there is no easy solution. I think training and continuing adaptation to the new techniques and possibly lateral thinking, I must say learning from the best practices of others is definitely the name of the game. So thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel, for this overview of how ICTs and the Internet can help in the humanitarian field and for communicating, accessing documents. I just wanted to ask you to add a few thoughts about how that in your field, in different regions in the world, the people deal with the fact that you have an internationally agreed legal basis of humanitarian law, and how this is implemented differently in different regions in the world, in different situations, by different people who live under completely different conditions, and how you manage, or you try to manage to get like these global principles applied in different situations. Maybe if you could add a little bit more in this direction. Thank you.
Yes. First, it's a general question, because if you deal with human rights, you could have universal instruments. Don't want to list them, but you have the 2 covenants, and you definitely have regional instruments: African, Arab, European, American, Asian, and I would say they do not contradict each other. Same story for refugee law. Refugee law, you have the 1951 Geneva Convention, but you also have the African Convention, you also have the Cartagena Declaration, and what is interesting is precisely to make people aware that they have these different levels of protection, and that at times regional instruments. For example, the Kampala Convention on IDPs, on internally displaced persons, is the only international convention on internally displaced persons. So it could give you ideas. You see? So I try to make available those texts is very useful. Then I would say definitely, and I've seen that with ICRC. ICRC first had a website in French, in English, and then we said, okay, but what about Arabic? What about Russian? What about Chinese? Ooh, we cannot do that on the same website. It will be confusing and so on. Wait a minute. Then you establish a delegation in Moscow, then you have a delegation in Cairo, then you have a delegation in Hong Kong and Beijing. But and then those delegations from the region have their own database in those languages. So I must say, yes, definitely subsidiarity is that you cannot do everything at headquarters because it will be too complicated, too expensive, and actually you will be missing a few steps. And then last thing is that definitely you need to realize that it's not because it's published in the New York Times or in Le Temps or whatever. What is really important, for example, in Africa, is local radio in local languages. So what you need in order to reach them, you need to give them, at that time we were giving them cassette tapes, but now it could be a different way of, to local radios. You give them, and at times also we were not Selena Gomez yet, but Youssou N'Dour, Papa Wemba, and Lucky Louie, possibly between several. But those singers did sing songs which were used to reach child soldiers. You know, they don't go to church, they don't go to school. Usually when they talk to people that with a gun, nevertheless, they listen to the radio. And so if you want really to reach them, then you have to use those African singers. You have to ask those African singers, could you sing something for us in your words? And then the message will be transmitted.
Thank you very much for these interesting examples. So I would take that even if the substance is not really different fundamentally, there are reasons for having contacts on local level for two reasons. One is communication, to actually reach people in their language. If things are adapted not just in the language but also in the environment, that they understand whether it's a song or another form. And the second one is maybe also ownership. So they need to feel like this is not something that is coming from New York or from Geneva, but it's something that is important to us, that we have an influence or we can give feedback, we understand. So these 2 points is what I would take as key. Let me quickly give you all an opportunity to, because Michel will need to leave to ask questions or make comments to his part, and then we'll follow up with the other panelists. So any questions, comments from the floor or from remote, if you have, not for the...
I will add one thing, but with local languages. At one point, the ICRC asked the BBC, but we had also the Deutsche Welle, the BBC to make, just say, something in Somali language. Because as you know, the Somalis don't read the New York Times, or at least not in Somalia. It was done, but then Somalis came back to us and said, you know, not serious. You took people from the same clan. Huh? So it's good to have the cadre vaudois, it's good to have people from the same region, but if you want to convince everyone, you will need actually to have the local sensibilities. And so that people will tell you, yes, this is important, and this is understandable, and we understand that you need not take sides in using local languages.
Thank Thank you, Michel. So, questions, comments from everybody? Khaled?
Yes,
and please introduce yourself, who you are, so that
people know. Khaled Fatal, the Multilingualism Group. Actually, first of all, I apologize. I arrived late. I listened to part of the conversation, the presentation. So if it hasn't already been covered, please take my apology. I fully agree that regarding the criticalness of localization and making the content available in the local language. But I was wondering whether this first needs to be, another issue has to be addressed first, which is making sure that along the way, the subsidiary meets minimum requirements so that the local element of what needs to be interacted or what needs to deliver on, whether it's policy making, whether it's going to be part of the bottom-up process, it needs to adhere to certain minimum requirements. So I'll give you an example. Let's assume a local chapter is recognized as a local chapter of something, but it's not transparent. It's not fulfilling some kind of a requirement of some sort, so it fulfills on the mandate of the larger picture. Then what you have is it actually becomes, for lack of a better term, the weakest link, and it actually collapses the entire process because it takes away from legitimacy. How much was that addressed in your presentation, or do you think this is valid?
Yeah. First of all, if you need to reach, first of all, if you speak of Africa, people don't have here, possibly especially in Switzerland, the real vision of how far you have to go, huh?
Yes,
how deep you have to go, and that's why you need many relays. Possibly at one point, people will have to use satellites to relay those messages down in the middle, in the heart of darkness. And but still, I think same story for UNOSAT. UNOSAT was saying, okay, wherever you are, whenever you need a picture, we have it. And I think we should do the same to transmit the messages. To say, wherever you want us to reach people, we can do this. But it's more something for local broadcasting. How can we indeed have those local broadcasting? How can we reach those schools, those hospitals, those, I would say possibly missionaries, and to have people relaying the message, also local artists, because griot, I would say actors or storytellers, that's griot in French, storytellers in Africa, you need to use them. You need to have local theater to possibly convey this message, because people will come. I remember one colleague at CICRC with deux chevaux, an old Citroën, and going with a generator and showing movies in villages. Of course, people were fascinated by this. But now we have more modern means possibly to do this. But definitely, we need to go to the people. Don't expect them to come from Kivu to Kinshasa. No. But go to Kivu.
Thank you. And I just want to stress that it shouldn't be a one-way communication from the centers down to the rural areas. It should also allow them, especially with the new technologies, to feed back their expectations, their needs, their questions to the centers. So, which is now much easier with the new technology.
If I might interject, I think absolutely correct. The message needs to go to the people. It needs to be from there so it can resonate with them. Absolutely correct. My question was more on what do we send to them first? So here's my thought. the topic is about how to make internet governance more relevant, how to engage with local community. Well, with many local communities, as you probably agree, basic concepts of representation, of democratic process, of transparency are probably not going to be high priorities. Doesn't mean we don't know them. So if we are going to deliver the message, any subsidiary into the format of internet governance, it needs to factor in that at local level, minimum requirements are met. And to me, what these minimum requirements are, that there's a format of due diligence or transparency. In other words, not him and his cousin got together and created a chapter, and now they're raising a flag and everybody supports it. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. That's my comment.
Well, I know that you're talking about,
something
among others, the Internet Governance Forum and the national and regional initiatives, where there's a big debate about who has the right to call himself an Internet Governance Forum. How do you live up to the principles that have been established? I think we'll pick that up for the discussion later. If there's a very short question that would allow us for a very short answer from Michel, we could have, yes, is there something?
It's not from the remote participants, it's from me,
okay.
Actually. But I don't have a question so far. My question is, when we say we and them, I want to understand who is we and who is them. It's a very simple question. I just want to have that clarified.
Yeah. But okay. Speaking again from the humanitarian point of view, and I think what is really important is that decisions are not taken at headquarters, but actually internet is being used to assess the needs from the field, to collect the priorities from the local populations, possibly even to help them to be more resilient, and then also to use these internet techniques for, I would say, very pressing, urgent needs like family use. And family use, for the point, yes, you can do that between, I don't know, Pakistani tribal areas, Peshawar, and Guantanamo. Oops, what are you saying? No, yes, it is. We need to put, to make the connection between prisoners and their families. We need also to make the connection between diasporas and affected populations, because that will be very important. That will create, I think, a momentum in helping these populations, in creating awareness and things like that. And then my last point would be to say, of course, at times we need also to inject not only data, but also values. And I did speak about a legal instrument, but at times it would be good also that spiritual, religious values would be also included in that. And I know that even the ICRC, quite a few years ago, started a dialogue with Muslim clerics in order to ask them and to tell them, please convey the message that our good Geneva Conventions are not contrary to your spiritual tradition. And indeed, it's very powerful. At times it could be very difficult, but it's very much needed, because then the Geneva Conventions are not appearing coming from the moon, you know, oh yes, that's a European concept. Yes, of course, Henri Dunant, a good guy, but nevertheless, we have other priorities, we have other traditions. No, actually, it's not contradictory with your own traditions and with your own religion.
Thank you very much, Michel. And so that was an interesting insight from a quite different field on substance, but with similar challenges. I would like to move on now to something again completely different, which is Peter Gruetter, who has been working for the Swiss government is now representing Swiss Telecom Industry Association, and has also spent some time abroad working on the international level and to ask him about his experience of how to work from a business point of view with different regulations, different systems in a global environment with shared technologies, shared infrastructures, and different needs in different situations. So Peter will now be shorter than with our first panelist because he has to leave. So Peter, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for telling me that I have to be short and also telling me what I have to say. So first I'd like to say good morning. No, good afternoon. I'm honored and pleased to address you, and I don't think that I can really add much value to the fantastic talks of the eminent experts you had yesterday and today, but I can try to share with you some experiences, some key success factors, I think, for the success of the network industry in Switzerland. But to start with, I would like to share with you something I read in the newspaper while coming to, or in the newspaper on my iPad, going at the time, when coming to Geneva this morning. And that is that a few hours ago, the Chinese Vice Premier Ma Kai opened the 3-day World Internet Conference in Boujemi, China. And President Xi Jinping expressed in his note his hope for a peaceful, open and safe network. Top Chinese players, Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent are there, and also international players like Microsoft, Cisco, Qualcomm and Apple. About 1,000 people attending. Yes, China wants more influence in internet governance. And as we all know, China also holds now the helm of the ITU. China has a new role to take responsibility and leadership. And as such is, of course, let's say, welcome and inevitable. China will soon be the strongest economy of the planet. The 21st century will be an Asian century and certainly not a Western century. Nevertheless, regards to this parallel conference in Boujemi, and it might be anywhere in the world, in Brazil or in the States, I do have some concerns. Because here in Geneva, with its humanitarian tradition, we know that in the humanitarian field, donor competition leads to aid fragmentation. To crowd in at any catastrophe as soon as the media are there is not efficient at all. And I fear and hope, and I hope that we can act accordingly, that internet governance competition and internet governance conference competition does not lead to internet fragmentation and to barriers between the networks. Because this fragmentation is a real danger, also because internet governance is not at all the same thing everywhere. In India and China, currently, I think internet governance is all about national regulations and national interests. I think in the Middle East and South America, internet governance is still mainly about access, decent access. In Africa, it's about economic development, and that is a huge opportunity there. By the way, West Africa's coastline is currently probably the most advanced network infrastructure on the planet. And they're very innovative in the use of technology, up to finding and containing, for instance, Ebola in Nigeria with informative apps. While in the US and Europe, internet governance is about the level playing field for service providers. It's about the role of over-the-top players like Google or Netflix. It's about protection of intellectual property. It's about harmful tax competition. All these are aims for better internet governance, but they are not at all the same. So this said, I would come to my 3 points which relate to Switzerland. First, Swiss government is, I'm surprised that I say it, is bottom-up and not top-down governance. Most federalist structures on the world are top-down structures. Switzerland is a bottom-up, and the US, by the way, is also a bottom-up structure. There are not many much more than that. In our federal state, only what can't be solved on the lowest level is delegated to the level above. And this rule also plays between the private and the public sector. And there is a culture of dialogue between the government and the private sector, which is very well established. I would say these sectors are very close and there are little firewalls between them in this country. This helped a digital policy environment that did not hamper business development and that left room for innovation. There is a reason why Switzerland is the global innovation champion since several years now. And I believe it has a lot to do with our understanding of federalism and of subsidiarity. My second point, internet governance is distributed. It's kind of outside in and inside out governance. It's not top-down governance either. Paul Duran, a US scientist, who in the late 50s and early 60s of the last century had the task to best protect the ATT network against the first nuclear strike of the then USSR, yes, this existed at the time. He developed and showed very clearly that a distributed structure, a distributed network is way more resilient than any kind of top-down centralized model or even top-down decentralized model. Distributed networks are the most resilient structures also in nature. And my third point, internet governance, that's in the same time a technical, an economic, and a social challenge. And I would say in discussion today, the social aspects, religious, ethics, privacy, data protection, personal freedom, reasons, rule of law, safety, security, all these aspects are very dominant in discussion. The second dominance are the economic aspects. I said before, all this related to global trade, labor, commerce, etc., to intellectual property, to taxation. The OECD since 2 years tries to find rules how to manage these different flows, these virtual value flows, if you want. And third, it's about functionality, infrastructure, and standards, about the technical aspect of the thing. And since this is the business of my industry, and since we started the day with Bob Kahn, I'd like to end with what Vint Cerf, the other father of the Internet Protocol, said at IGF 214 in Istanbul. He said the network is a network of ZIG networks. Don't forget that the robustness of this system relies on its ability to accommodate diversity. We do not have to have a homogeneous system. We just have to have a system that has adequate commonalities. Diversity and commonality together make the internet function. And my takeaway from this for you is that perhaps a blend of, let's say, Swiss bottom-up federalism and Windsor's commonalities might be a winning recipe to answer the question on which policy level an IG issue should be addressed. There is no one answer to this question. There is for each issue a different. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for this very clear statement. I suggest that now, since we have all of us will remain, that we take the inputs from everybody and then ask for, because we could take the rest of the time to discuss what you just said, and I think it's better and it's more fair to have the whole picture. So I would ask you to keep your questions in mind and straight continue to my neighbor on the right to present her experience from her field. Please go ahead.
Yes, yes, good morning. My name is Hanane Boujemi. I'm from Morocco. I'm managing a program on internet governance for the Middle East and North Africa. Yeah, I learned a lot from the input of the first speakers, and I was trying to find, analogies on how to connect, for example, the social media strategies of humanitarian organizations to engage, the communities to support a cause, or using celebrities to advocate for something specific that is, challenging for communities. Of course, we all know the role of social media and the internet and what happened back in 2011 in the Arab region, and I think it was a very good tool helping people to voice their concerns and eventually be able to change things. The Middle East is, of course, going through many important processes at the moment, from countries in, transition to others still fighting, to have some level of stability so they can start living and, leading normal life like all of us. Internet governance is one of the, it is why actually the internet now in the Middle East, the discussion is more flourishing maybe. Before there was a huge obscurity about the concept. There's still a problem with governance as a concept because most people in the Middle East will think we are talking about government, so I prefer to use policy, internet policy, so we're on, the same page. With regards to which level policy should be kind of made in the Middle East, that's a very challenging question because what we're doing in our program, we started with mapping the policy challenges in the Middle East and where the problem resided. I have a long list here of policy challenges from the lack of transparency in implementing policies related to the internet, the traditional role of the government being the only stakeholders implementing policies. There is no kind of participatory process in implementing these policies or even consulting with people. Of course, one of the major issues is the ambiguity of regulation in the current legislation. It's very complicated, vaguely worded. Most of the time, the terminology has two meanings, and you really don't know where you stand exactly when it comes to government regulation specific to the internet. There is a tendency to apply offline legislation online without taking into consideration the specific nature of the internet. There is generally a hardline policy, that is implemented by the government because of the fear that is generated from the use of the internet after what happened in the Middle East. We managed to map some of the laws at the moment in the Middle East, and up till March 2014, there is like 63 laws, new laws that are applied in a selected number of countries in the Middle East. And if you take a look at them, they are really worrying because they basically clamp down more on freedom and on inherent rights that we all believe in, to use the internet in an equal manner to gain economic and sustainable development in these countries. So I think the internet means different things for different people around the world. And for the Middle East, I think one key solution would be for the governments to try to open up a little bit the channel to have a discourse with other stakeholders so we can have what we would like, as a regional, transparent dialogue on internet governance. And I think localizing, issues and challenges is very important. It's from there the dialogue at the global level, at the level of the UN, we realized very early that there should be kind of localization of IGFs, and that's why we have different dialogues happening around the world. EURDIG, the West African IGF, Latin American, Arab IGF as well, but they all have different structures and different milestones, and of course the dynamic of the discussion is completely different. I think what I see in the Middle East is that we have a long way to go. Because even the official, let's say, stand of governments is really very far from believing in a simple principle, multi-stakeholder. This terminology, we hear it so many times in the IG world, but in the Arab region, like the official governments, they have a very rigid stand vis-a-vis how this dialogue should be shaped. They really think governance is the business of government, and to bridge, that huge gap on a simple principle based on which the whole discussion should be shaped has been completely a deadlock situation almost. I mean, even though we have a forum where we try to bring civil society to kind of be part of the whole scene, it is still a huge challenge, and there is like a huge wall between these two actors, just because the internet happened to change, whole regimes, deeply rooted in the society, is quite established for a long time. And unfortunately, that kind of revolution brought a lot of negativity on the internet as a tool that we see now a main tool for economic development. So we have to try to associate, the internet policy or internet governance discussion with how it can help these countries get out from the deep hole, in which they are now. But that I've seen a long route out there. The most important thing is to have a vision, to have a well-informed, Arab region citizen. There's a huge knowledge gap, and I know there are many organizations trying to organize training programs. Like Michel pointed out, training is very important, and bringing people to discussion, and most importantly, convince them to be part of this. From my experience, I see that civil society in the MENA region are quite resentful, into sitting, to sit on the same table with their governments. There's always this relationship of, love-hate kind of a thing. There is no belief in having a dialogue about these issues, and it's really unfortunate, that we're still at the stage where we have to mobilize, the community to be in a position to advocate for specific, issues that are of huge relevance. Of course, the infrastructure and access as an issue is important, but I think the internet governance discussion in the Middle East is very much related to a concept that is not very dear to the hearts of the governments in the Middle East, and that's freedom. And freedom at various levels. It's still a highly sensitive issue, and every governance problem is related to content. The infrastructure is important, but the content is the problem. So when you apply offline legislation online, like you see different countries trying to craft, quickly legislation to clamp down more on freedom of expression, and that's the source cause of all the problems that we have. So I think one day there should be some kind of, a way for these governments to open up a little bit, their mind to the discussion, to be more on let's say, not community level. At the moment, it's more confrontational. When you have two groups hating each other, so they're both confronting each other. There isn't the spirit of sitting down together and, let's say, we have a participatory, process where we value the input of civil society or other actors to make things better for everyone. So we're not there yet. It's a long way, and I believe that, if you want to make decisions about how the internet should be governed in a specific context, there is a definite need to involve different stakeholders and be serious about it as well. Like, bring them to the table and learn, from their experiences. After all, they will have to use this internet. It's not the government, but the top-down structure. It's still there. It is persistent. It's not going to change anytime soon. There is, a need to kind of, wash a whole generation into believing in different, concepts about how policy should be made generally. It's not specific only to internet governance, to environment, to other policies and how the government is run. So that's the root cause of the problem. That's the main challenge, and we still have to work on it more. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think that was also very interesting. Just the fact that even the term internet governance is not applicable or has different effects and different connotations around the world shows that maybe global solutions are fine, but they need to be adapted to specific environments. I'd like to hand over immediately to Norbert, who has a technical background in many ways, but is also a very active civil society representative in Switzerland and worldwide. So Norbert, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Norbert Bollow. I'm one of the two conveners of something called the JustNet Coalition, which we founded in February, getting together organizations and individuals from all over the world who are concerned about internet governance and concerned that some trends might actually destroy democracy. I'm totally aware that not all countries are very democratic, but some countries have a good standard of democracy, and that includes Switzerland. So we don't want to lose what we have. Coming to subsidiarity, this is for me, an absolutely core principle of democracy, especially when we try to apply democracy to an internet governance context. As much it would be technically so simple, so nice, so clean to solve these global problems globally, in a globally unified way, as soon as we start asking these nasty questions about democracy, which are not nasty in their intention, but as soon as you get serious about them, they become really nastily difficult. One key aspect that really drives home the need for subsidiarity to me is the issue of language. We have already mentioned the importance of language for informing people about humanitarian rights, and I will generalize to human rights in general, which are universal. The important thing is to inform people about the rights they have. Also, of course, sometimes they may have some need to say, hey, you forgot something, like the disability community not very long ago said, hey, there was something missing, and a new set of human rights laws, international law norms have been established. That's one area to inform people about the human rights they have. Then we have mentioned the second layer of learning from each other, which happens at the IGFs, decentralized in many languages. Then when we talk about democracy, you know, I think we all agree democracy is not just about voting. Before you can vote, there must be some proposal about which to vote, which may be voted about in a parliament, which might be voted about in a public referendum, but somehow the text must be created. There must be some kind of discourse creating the text. And if people are not able to participate in that discourse, they are excluded. And if this discourse happens only in English, we are excluding the majority of the world population right from the start. This does not work. Simply unacceptable. We must empower people to participate in the public policy discourses that are relevant to them in their own language. And that automatically will localize things much more than we would like them to be localized. Now, it was mentioned for some issues there is no problem when things are localized. The Internet Protocol is a great abstraction that abstracts from anything below it. You can organize your autonomous system, which is a technical term for some kind of structure, in any way you want, as long as you use the Internet Protocol, the packets will flow. No problem. The problems start when there is diversity above this transport layer. The kinds of things that people all around the world happen to be concerned about, they happen to be mostly above this transport layer. Only the technical guys who care about the low-level things, but diversity is not a problem. In practice, when there are, for example, quite different laws which apply to an internet business, like suppose every country in the world at the national level has their own very, very different laws. And a company doing business to people in that country has to conform to that law. What will happen? Well, the good companies providing good services, they will only serve the interesting markets. Everybody else will be excluded because that diversity simply kills the ability to offer a reasonable service at a reasonable price. You're not going to convince many Swiss companies to hire lawyers specialized in the national law of over 100 countries. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for US companies either, and it's not going to happen for African companies, certainly not. So that is a real problem. If we want democracy, and subsidiarity, which we have to have if there is democracy, we have to also create some kind of coordinating structure that has a function of minimizing the amount of complexity that is created by means of giving people the authority and ability to make decisions locally. There is quite a bit of a challenge to make that practically happen. I have an internet draft out called International Wisdom Task Force, which is a proposal for that. I will not go into the details, just mention one thing, that while multi-stakeholder processes are of course absolutely essential in order to get the wisdom and different perspectives in, it is also essential to structure those processes so that the resulting discourse will not be dominated by business interests, which happens in many multi-stakeholder processes. In many multi-stakeholder processes, it's not really a problem. For some areas of technical standardization, which are relevant really to the participating companies only, where the decisions to be made are really of the kind, do the cars drive on the left or on the right side? I don't care what side from a public policy perspective. I only care that somehow they decide and everybody drives on the same side. No problem if that is sort of business driven. But there are public policy concerns, and there you need to be really careful to make sure that we don't just give this into the hands of business interests or create veto rights, not written veto rights of course, but effective in practice. This has to be very carefully designed to make sure subsidiarity is not of the kind that at the top there's the big business interests and at the bottom there are the poor little democratic states. Thank you.
Thank you for this. And I note that from what Peter said and what Norbert has said, on a technical level, the coexistence of some, let's say, basic principles and diversity seems to be much less of a problem than on the political or economic and what you call meta level. I think this is something interesting. Since we have started late, I think we can continue until something like 1 o'clock, which gives us a rough half an hour. So I think there's enough to discuss. I would just like to give you the floor and allow you to make comments, ask questions, and then we see how the discussion develops. Do you have a remote participation?
I do.
Comment question? Okay, thank you. And do we need to get the microphone around when discussed so that whatever is said here in this room is heard also remotely?
Absolutely.
So be aware that you will wait for the microphone before you speak.
Right. Is this working?
You can hear it.
Okay. So the first question comes to us from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, from the STEP research group, and their hub has about 9 people there. And the question is specifically for Mr. Peter Gruetter, and the question goes as follows. How, in your opinion, is it possible to secure a level playing field for global service providers while maintaining the diversity of the legal regulation?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that global service providers so far, and this system of different peers who make sure that information flows globally is working quite well today. As I said about windsurf, this adequate set of commonalities makes that the technology of transporting information in all ways is working. So I don't think that internet governance problem is a technical problem today. I think it's a problem on the content, on the issue level, where the world is on the policy level, where the world is, we do not all have the same values, we do not all have the same economic considerations we make when we move in our, etc. And that's exactly there where diversity is needed. Not, let's say, on the infrastructure levels, which makes that, as Michel Veuthey said, that the Pakistani in Pakistan can communicate with the Pakistani who is living on an island where he perhaps doesn't want to be now. This should not be the problem, and it's not anymore today. But when we talk about internet governance, then we have to really shed these different levels. We have to separate them. We cannot always talk about the same thing. It is not the same thing. The technical governments, if you want, the standards, the rules to make information flow and to have access to information and have also the net neutrality questions, etc., all these things are finally operational or operating questions, how you make a borderless network or borderless networks operate. While the content level, whether it's good to have disrespectful sketches about the prophet in the internet, or whether you like children pornography or not. That, I will tell you, the cultures of this world address these issues very, very differently. Even if we think that everybody should think the same thing, that's not at all the case.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Patrick.
Thank you. My question goes to Veuthey. Thank you very much for his opening remarks on the conference taking place in China at the moment. And
wait for the mic.
Oh.
Maybe, yes, if you can help us, if you can help us getting the microphone around, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't touch it, it's working.
Hello. Thank you very much. Patrick Farnham from the Swiss Mission in Geneva. My question goes to Peter Gruetter concerning his opening remarks on the actual conference in China. Because there was also quite a lot of talk about this conference in the BBC radio this morning. My question concerns your definition of fragmentation. You said, and of course we all understand it, I suppose, that in the internet, something which has to be avoided is fragmentation. But to which extent do you believe that an actual economic power like China will be interested in having what we call the so-called fragmentation of the internet? Isn't it in the national interest of countries, governments, as well as all the big firms who do the nitty-gritty, who do the hardware, to guarantee an open internet?
Well, thank you. I think that the free and open internet is a kind of, well, perhaps kind of a reality of the past, and perhaps still kind of a vision for the future, but it's not the current reality. The internet is not one network. The internet is, as I said, or Winsor said, it's many, many different networks. And it's a fact that if you go to China and you try to access certain content on this free and open internet, you will not find it. You will find as many search results on a site there as you find here, but you will not find the content you're looking for. The same thing here also. There's also one huge barrier there is what was mentioned several times today, is the language. And I personally believe that the language problem will be technically solved within 5 to 10 years by simultaneous expert systems, capacity to almost translate in any language. I mean, try today to call a friend in South Africa and speak to him in German and let it simultaneously translate by Google Translator to Afrikaans. I will tell you, we can follow the discussion almost one-to-one. So this language problem will be solved, I think. But this will not change that there will be local content produced, and that's good so. And this will not shine up when you search for something. So there are barriers in the internet today, and there are certain governments who are trying to keep up and to strengthen these barriers. And I would say, as far as we can read, for instance, in certain Asian or also in certain Arab countries, there are efforts to really don't take these barriers down, but to strengthen these barriers, because the people think that their societies are influenced by the, let's say, not right content they have access to, or perhaps also freedom of expressions and things like this. That is a danger, and it can lead to fragmentation of the internet. I hope it will not, but it can.
Thank you. Just to add to this, that I wouldn't necessarily only mention the regions that you mentioned, because we have similar tendencies in Europe, in the US. There it's for other issues like fight against terrorism or against surveillance by other governments, which is a reason for protecting people and putting up barriers. Normally there's not always bad intentions behind putting up barriers, but sometimes there are unintended consequences or maybe second uses and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't focus this only on some regions in the world. It's a tendency that we have almost everywhere for different reasons. Do you want to react to this?
So, sorry, I really tried to avoid the term surveillance today. But now
sorry for breaking
surveillance team, and you took the West. And I'd say, well, one hand, I deplored that yesterday. I think the Senate blocked the reform of the Patriot Act, so that the NSA will keep all its power it has so far. That's one thing. But on the other hand, we should not forget, and this is really a number which made me reflect a bit about this surveillance. The NSA is set to analyze about 29 petabytes of information per day. That is 4 petabytes more than a human brain in one day. Human brain is about 25 petabytes a day. So we work about, each one of us works during the day about the same amount of information as the NSA does worldwide. So I'm not really sure that I should be afraid by 3 of you. I feel quite comfortable. That's to survey. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for this. The lady here, and then we have 2 hands over there. Thank you.
My name is Madeleine Chef. I'm an economist and a graduate PhD secretary from University of Bonn, Germany. So I'm president also of the Health and Environment Program based in Cameroon, also here in Geneva. And my question is related to the democracy, and I would like to ask to Norbert, how do you think that we can link the local level and the international level at the same time with a big structure? How do you think about that structure? The structure would include the leaders of NGOs or the locally the government, or I want to know which structure do you think about these regards of subsidiarity? Thank you.
Okay, let me start by mentioning that since my thinking about all this starts from democracy, and democracy is a really, really difficult thing to set up, so I would like to build on what exists already. And in the democratic countries, in every democratic country, we have a parliament. So I want to build on this existing structure of parliaments and just provide what is missing. What is missing is international coordination to give the national parliaments input that enables them to choose from proposals that have had international input from all the various international perspectives, because whatever we do in a small country, it has an international impact at that level above the transport layer. So there should be this very, very broad international discourse which informs the national parliaments. So in this international discourse, obviously we should try very, very hard to get political people involved from as many countries as possible, to get also all other kinds of stakeholders involved. So if this is to work, it has to be an open participation kind of thing, where not only the leaders or those who are somehow recognized as a leader by some kind of gateway process can participate. It must be an open kind of process like the IETF, and that's actually what the name International Wisdom Task Force plays on, the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is an open participatory structure which has certain consensus processes, so that even though anybody can come in, it actually works to create worthwhile output documents that, in the case of the IETF, define the technical structure of a lot of what is happening on the internet. But of course, for public policy issues, you have to make some adjustments.
Yeah, I can relate to how it's important to have a global process, and then feed into the national level. I can give an example of the work that was done by the UN Internet Rights and Coalition. The Rights and Principles Coalition. They worked on a charter for human rights on the internet, and I think the Marcus Surveil, for example, was inspired by the work that was done by this coalition, and the new Internet Bill of Rights of New Zealand as well. They took that kind of work and they engaged with their MPs at the local level to present to them the principles on human rights and principles, and that's how global work can feed into the objectives that we would like to reach at the local level. So this is a very good example. We're trying to do the same thing in the Middle East, but with a slight tweak, because we're trying to localize these principles to fit into the specific, circumstances of this region. So we worked on it this year. We did the translation, but it's not enough. You have to be able to localize the content of these principles so they make sense to the audience from the Middle East. Now the next step is to try to take it further to the government, to present them with work that was done, by the global community, and try to kind of convince them adopt these kinds of principles in the way they engineer, policies specific to the internet. Of course, there is no guarantee they will take that on board, but at least, the work is done, and it's a good example that was replicated in democratic models like Brazil and New Zealand, and that should be a good example to refer to.
Thank you. That was very interesting. The person in the back and then the one before.
Yes, Jean-Christophe Mathias from Geneva Coalition. Thank you for the panel. Subsidiarity. Europe had a lot of difficulty to deal with this idea. European citizens, they didn't get with that. What is it? What do you mean? Remember that for all these different European campaigns, it was very difficult. Second, subsidiarity works. It works with every level having a special framework. You said, jump it up to the next level. What is the next level at the ultimate level today, the global level? It's emptiness, or US. And part of the fact that subsidiarity might not work is not only due to us as citizens not able to understand exactly what it is, or having the good support to understand it, but maybe because some part of that scale, of those different steps, are not in place today, and maybe blocking us from gently distributing the different issues at the right level of concern. Do you agree with that view? I'm not sure I agree with myself on this, but do you agree with that analysis?
Does anybody want to? Does anybody want to react from the whole room to that question? Peter?
Well, I hope not speaking on it for myself. I think since we live in a world of nation states still, It shows that, let's say, governance structures for problems which should really be addressed and perhaps also regulated at a supranational level are very weak. We see that. Of course, we have organizations like the UN, but they usually have no decisive power, are only in very limited fields. And we have organizations like the EU, which are, from my very humble perspective, organized in a way that the EU is somehow responsible for everything which is not important in Europe. And the real important policies like financial policies or defense or so are subject of the nation states. And I know this is a bit a placated way of saying it, but it should be the other way around. It should be the other way around.
You mean currency is not a big thing?
Well, the EU is a very big thing.
Central bank is not a big thing. The Court of Justice is not a big thing. Hey, come on.
I just say that governance at the European level and also the government at global level is a very fragmented in certain fields governance. And it's not so that the nation states were ready to really give the most important questions to the upper levels. I don't say this is wrong. I just say it's a fact. Perhaps it's even right. But I say that I think certain of these models relate quite well to what I described as the Swiss model before. I mean, it's kind of way of what we cannot solve at our local, national, etc. and we try to solve it at the upper level. But we are definitely not yet there with a coherent system. And the more we go up the ladder, the less there is there on the upper stage the power to really address and solve the problems which should be solved at this stage. You can see it conflicts in nations, you can see it in economic power with different regions, etc., etc.
You mean there's actually too much subsidiarity between the national level and the global level, and nation, at least the governments, maybe not the people, but the governments are not willing to cede in cases like climate change and others where they're not able to find solutions among them to cede this to a higher body. And I guess this is what you allude to in the EU, where in fact many important issues are in the end in the power of the national governments. But let's not go into discussing how the EU works. But this is an important issue. Norbert, very quickly, and then we move to the next question.
I have just a quick comment on what Peter said. Quite earlier, on the bottom-up nature of Swiss federalism, like the US, Switzerland started with not as a federal state, but as a federation of states, cantons. And maybe we have to think about that kind of model at the international level also. Right now we have these weak institutions that try to include everyone, and then we have weak plurilateral processes, which are in a way powerful instruments of one dominating country to create some international law in a piecemeal way by getting it into some countries first and then pushing it forward. But maybe it should be created a better thing in an inclusive way that is from the beginning designed to be open to the interests, to the legitimate interests of all peoples of the world, but at the same time not insisting that all must join immediately. Have a process which is quite designed to be totally fair, including to developing countries, but not insist that all countries must join immediately, especially Western countries who may not want to join immediately because they want to stay the privileged rich countries for a little longer. Okay, let them stay out for a little longer, but let the real people who care about the future of the world start joining together and building it.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Jean-Michel, I'm a lecturer at the University of Lausanne in Political Science. I have a question. It's not addressed to any panelists in particular, but I hear that the common sense in internet governance is that diversity and subsidiarity are good and fragmentation is bad. But I don't know if there is a way to draw the line between the two, and if there is a clear definition of what fragmentation is, or is it just the fragmentation threat, political argument to delegitimize some local rules, some local mechanisms to promote a more global mechanisms?
I think that's a very good question, and I was asking myself also earlier. And in fact, it's of course, it's also a question of sharing power, sharing decision-making power. And if you say subsidiarity is good, you need and of trust. You need to trust people at the lower levels that they actually are able to take their decisions, which may be to their advantage and should not be to the advantage of others. This is also something that I realized at quite a late stage in my life, that even our neighbors in the European countries, whenever we have votes and the result of the votes are sometimes not what everybody likes, but this is our direct democracy, they tell, well, this is why you shouldn't let people decide themselves on issues, why we need a top-down. In the end, we need somebody on top who tells people what to do. Where I then say, even if I don't like a particular outcome of a vote, we trust, our system is built on the trust that in the end people decide what they do, and that's it. Apart from some constitutional borders, of course. And I realize we are one of the only countries where the government, the industry, and the people themselves trust that the people in the end may take the right decisions. Even in our neighbor countries, this trust is very, very much lower. And of course, if you talk about subsidiarity so if you trust people, then you probably use the term of subsidiarity and diversity. If you don't trust the ones on lower level that they do something good for the global, then you talk about fragmentation, which is something that should need to be avoided. But as Peter and others have said, I think, let's say, diversity is there. We can't unify the whole world. But the point is probably we need to create interoperability mechanisms for diverse systems that are on equal level, but also interoperability in a way up and down. And I think maybe we can dig a little bit deeper in the last few minutes on how to create this interoperability, that it actually strengthens the whole system and it doesn't weaken or fragment or whatever damage the system. Maybe this is something that we should, looking forward, to try and concentrate on. Thank you. Emanuel?
Thank you. I'm just coming with an observation from the Asian context, because I come from that region. Subsidiarity is an ideal principle, but somehow it is difficult to implement it. If you look at how the society is structured, and in particular the role of the government in that particular context. I personally feel that the government has a very important role as a facilitator and enabler, but somehow it's not able to embrace this role fully because the government is continuously under attack, and the internet makes it very easy for them to come under attack from their own people with different views. And so what happens is that the government tends to withdraw into their own shell, and they stop consulting, and they go on to the international fora with a particular view, which they may consult the private sector because they have a closer relationship, but less so than with civil society and citizens. And this is a problem in trying to create a clear line from the local, national, and global level. I actually think that we need to strengthen the capacity of government as a facilitator and enabler, and that is one way to connect this line and have them feel less threatened to address the complexity. Thank you.
Well, talking about the fragmentation of the internet, I think we refer to it in the global discussion of internet governance at the infrastructure level. I'm sure we're all familiar with the attempts of Iran to have a national, internet. China as well, has its own internet. And, the discussion is, well, fragmenting the internet will help kind of have a completely different platform, or maybe the internet will lose its value as an open platform where we all can, plug in and, benefit from its open nature. And that's from the technical perspective. I had another comment about, the top down, but it's skipped my mind, for now, for a little bit. But I think in terms of synchronizing, internet policies, that we discuss at the global level, it would be very, very challenging to apply them to local contexts. We understand that very well now. We should probably have maybe global decisions on issues that has a global nature. Like, the major issues are access, for example, in Africa. We know that the next, billion of internet users will come from this region and so on. But when it comes to trying to apply other policies on the local level, it would be very challenging because we have to respect specific, cultural values, religious values, and I think Michel, he elaborated a little bit on that. In the Arab region, for example, there's a huge controversy about, freedom as a concept, because freedom has no limits, according to, the Arab region context, and it clashes with a lot of cultural values and religious values. So what do? We bring imams into the discussion, so we try to find a fine line between, freedom and, respecting other people's opinions or religious and cultural values. What do? These people are completely out of the loop, when it comes to, how the internet functions, how does it respect these values, and they're even a little bit resentful of using it. So I'm sure that we're not including everybody in the same part. We're not at the same level, when discussing, policy matters on the internet. Maybe a good way would be to include these people, invite them, and to share their point of view, because we don't know what's their, stake. Like, you see a lot of imams, for example, now in the Arab region having what we call fatwas. Some people some of them say that it's haram to use the internet because you see women without a veil, and there are all kinds of funny anecdotes, about that. But what do we know? I think we need to bring them in, to see whether we can apply, this engineered strategies or policies that we discuss at the global level. Maybe it's not relevant to them, so we have to be probably careful on how ambitious we are when it comes to designing these policies at the global level.
Thank you. Just one remark also to Rinalia's proposal about strengthening government's abilities to moderate. Actually, we already are in the middle of a shift, where the role of governments is changing. And in the WICI's declaration, we have the famous sentence about all stakeholders in their respective roles, and the roles of governments have changed. If you look at the dominion system at ICANN, it's not the governments who are in the driving seat, it's the private sector who is in the driving seat. And we have, for instance, the discussion on national level, it's our civil society, our businesses in Switzerland that tell us, don't change that model because we don't want you as governments in the driving seat. We want this to be in private hands. Okay, we take note. We have no responsibility for the decisions that are taken in this private sector-led environment. But then the funny thing is, as soon as their civil rights are infringed by a decision of ICANN, or as soon as trademark rights are infringed because they are not taken care of, then of course they come to us and say, you have to defend our interests as businesses or as civil society or as individuals, you need to do something. And then we say, well, sorry, we have no decision power, but we can say something, for instance. And so it's funny that actually, as government, you are forced in this system too, because you don't have the decision power anymore. That's gone to a large extent. To actually moderate interests, try to help the decision makers to notify a balance or get a balance right of interests, and your role is to moderate this discussion. This is more and more what we perceive, at least in my experience and the ones that I talk. So I think this is a very relevant point. We are in the middle of, I don't know when the others stop or when the lunch break is starting and stopping. I think we should more or less stop. I know that Khaled wanted to add something.
Yeah, I wanted to add a small thing because about democratic regimes. It's a very nice concept, and I like it. And I really would like to know whether there is a very good example of a democratic regime, whether in Europe or the US or elsewhere. I know that you basically praise your regimes of being, democratic and transparent and inclusive and all that. But does it really happen? Because, as you said, the government has, the leverage to implement the policy. It's up to them to implement specific policies, and you probably have a say in what, in what these policies are about. But do you actually contribute in, with your input? And can you see that reflected in the policy implemented by the government, or it's just you there in the room and you're being consulted, and whatever you say is probably not taken into consideration? Yeah.
Okay, so let me disclose that I'm not Swiss, I'm a German citizen. Having moved to Switzerland, ironically, because I like certain aspects of the political system here.
And the tax?
Nothing about tax. I happen to be active in politics a bit. Even though I have no Swiss passport, I have made the experience that in this Swiss system it is possible to be influential in politics without having a Swiss passport. If you happen to be invited by a member of parliament to go to the parliament building to talk with them, you need a passport. But a foreign passport is perfectly fine.
But I think you're talking about lobbying here.
No, but maybe
it is influencing the outcome of the processes of parliament out of not citizen concern because I'm not a citizen, but out of a resident's concern of the person living here, and I make the experience that I'm getting taken serious as I desire. Mostly, sometimes not quite, but sometimes yes. I'm not totally happy, but mostly happy.
Just to add one word on the Swiss example. In Switzerland, if you think that a government does not do enough on net neutrality, you can propose a text for an article in the constitution, or in some cases for a law. You can propose it and have everybody vote. On the other hand, if you don't like a law or an article in the constitution that the government or the parliament proposes to you, you can vote on it and say, I like it, I don't like it. If it's a no, then they will have to come up with a different approach. So in our system, but of course, and this is what I wanted to add about the parliament, in theory, a parliament should represent all the people of a country, but of course there are ways that make it easier for some people to have access to be member of the parliament or to access to lobby the parliament. And of course, also in a direct democracy where, in theory, everybody, at least with a Swiss passport, can vote on any issue, can propose any text that is becoming a law or a constitution. There are some that have easier access also to media to influence public debates than others, but that's like a real existing version of whatever concept we have. But in this country, you can change any law, you can say no to any law, almost, any part of the constitution on all levels, in your community, in the canton, and on the national level. So you have it on all levels. Thank you.
Thomas, if I may just...
Yeah, Khaled, please.
30 seconds, please. I'm too frustrated to hear this and not have to put this on the record, please. The subject matter you're addressing, Khaled, one more time. The subject matter you're addressing here is subsidiarity in internet governance. Critical topics that have actually been raised are democracy, surveillance, and others. Now, the last 5 or maybe 10 minutes of the debate has really been very Western-centric. I don't even want to say US-centric. For somebody who has been involved in market development in emerging markets for longer than 25 years, and I accept that the intentions are very, very sincere, very good. But who said we have to follow the same track of what has happened in democratic processes, like what has been seen in the US or in Switzerland or in the UK? It's taken hundreds of years. The trajectory of citizens in emerging markets, where they were yesterday, where they are today, is a different process from where we are and what we need to take them to. So if we want to instill democratic processes, I would challenge that taking what has already existed in democratic systems is looking backwards, not looking forward. What I think you need to look at is democratic processes. I'll bring you all back to George Bush's statement declaring that the Iraq war was over because the Iraqis could stand in line and vote. Voting is only one component of democracy. Democracy is actually a language that needs to be taught to some cultures because they've been under so many different regimes that they forgot the process of respecting somebody's opinion because it's been different to them. So, do we really follow the track of parliaments? I would challenge in emerging markets. If it exists, fine, but for the purpose of subsidiarity and internet governance, that is not the right approach. One last case in point. Look at the way the internet users, the 3 billion that are out there today, 2 billion of their emerging markets, they've all joined in the last few years, and they all use mobiles and apps to get onto the internet. Their trajectory of usability is different from us who has been, been using it for the last couple of decades. So we leverage this to bring them into the process. So what I think is critical to put into place is transparent processes, representative processes. Put those in place, then you ensure that subsidiarity does deliver bottom up so that it does represent the people. Otherwise, we're giving them something that has worked somewhere else that maybe it might work and help empower them. That's my comment for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. You took more than 30 seconds, but it was excellent. It was excellent. Thank you for it. I think this is a very good...
I was using Arab timing, not Swiss timing.
Excellent. And I'm fully with you on that. Thank you very much. I think this is a very good end of this because I think we can all fully subscribe to what you just said, and we hope that is the continuation of the debate. Thank you to your frustration, Khalid. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think we need to stop. It's almost 50 past now. I don't know whether the afternoon will start, whether the original time schedule is still valid, 2 o'clock. So, bon appetit, to say it in the local language. See you.